warned when they have 1 minute left to go and then 30 seconds remaining in their time. There will be no rebuttals, and then time permitting, they'll have 2 minutes at the end for a closing statement. I believe that's essentially how it goes. For questions, the questions must be appropriate for either candidate to answer. So make sure they're appropriate across the board.
Yes, you meant both.
For both, I'm sorry?
You meant they have to be appropriate for both candidates.
They have to be appropriate for both candidates to answer. Exactly. So, all right. And I had said that we would start at 12:15. So, do you want to step outside and we can flip a coin, or do you want to flip a coin here? And do you want to go through the rules again, or do you feel good?
I got the rules, you flip the coin.
All right.
You want to call it or you want her to call?
We're good? All right. Well, whose heads?
Up to you.
No, come on. Don't put this on there. Whose heads?
Mark Lewis.
Okay. And it's heads. So Mark Lewis will take the first question. All right. So we got a few minutes. Unless you want to start.
Make sure it wasn't one of these coins, two-headed coins, please.
I think maybe a few more minutes.
Because they flip the coin, make sure it's not one of these two-headed coins. We can't start right now. Okay. Oh, good. People are getting it. I see people are getting it. It's already on. We're on live. Whoever didn't hear me before, if you have friends that want to see it, it's on the Hello Reading Facebook page. Because Reading 411 is political. Is not political. I know you did. But I told you, I'm sure you have just one more round that's not here. You got it? You like it? Lee's gonna get such a kick out of this. I found this table at a thrift store for $8. And it's a women's jacket. He likes it, loves it. And you have to take it to college. Imagine if you take it to college. It's really cool. Yeah. Right? Well, at least this way I got to use it because I couldn't find it. Yeah, good, right? I know how to use it. I was eating it. Or like everything else. Step on the tech and it's free. One morning, so I had to so I Yeah, that's right. I moved that from there all the way to there. How long did this take? Oh, okay, so maybe you'll do that.
Around here, is there seat over there? Yes.
Yeah, let's see if, well, I don't know, what do you, we're discussing court, if we should change the court, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think it's okay the way it is?
Well,
Let's see.
well then, what do you say? Want to move it back? Is that what you want?
No, we're thinking if
You're just offering? Okay.
changing.
What the heck?
That.
Here, why don't you unplug it? I don't want to touch it. Go ahead. Well, that's very generous of you.
Thank you.
Now this looks like a nice one. Now, don't, you know. Where are we going with that?
Thank you.
Wait, which one are you doing? From there? Oh, I might take that down. I thought you were talking about
so you
that.
wanna just leave it? All right. It's too late. Thank you, though.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. But thanks. You're on camera, both of you. So don't pick your noses. They just heard me say that. Right? Now we're getting the crowd. Oh, okay, and Scott. If we follow on here, it just gets Facebook Live. I just did, like, I just did, let's see, I just did that. That's what I did. But, is it you? Is it you? Right. Okay. She says she can hear me making jokes. I don't know.
Here's another chair over here.
We have 12 people watching. I don't have to do that spread out. I come from Belmore. South Shore. Oh yeah, we're back in here. Same train line. Oh Both.
And you have enough capacity.
It's not going in my pocket. It's all. It's all.
And you have enough room.
I just have to really cover that if I didn't have it plugged
Everybody who would like to submit a question had an opportunity to submit a question? Okay, pass this along and someone will pick it up for you. Make sure it has Board of Finance or Board of Ed on it so we know how to screen it.
We're short of Board of Ed questions. People want to.
Okay. Okay. All right. For those of you who have come in since, the way we're going to run this debate is very similarly to a League of Women Voters debate. We tossed a coin. Mark Lewis will have the first question. There are no opening statements. He will have 2 minutes to answer the question. He will receive a warning at 1 minute. minute and 30 seconds with his time remaining. And then Ed Miller will have the opportunity to answer the same question. He can ask to have the question read again to him. And then we will continue on until the time runs out, the end of 30 minutes. Each candidate will have the opportunity to give a 2-minute closing. The questions submitted must be appropriate for both candidates. So, and I have 12:15. So with that, I'll direct the first question to Mark Lewis. Can you tell us your understanding of the Board of Finance mandate?
Sure. Well, first, thanks Julia and the League of Women Voters for organizing this event. Thanks for Ed and all of you for coming today. The Board of Finance's role is to review and verify the budget submitted by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education before they go to the voters, and to make a decision on the final tax rate. In other words, the Board of Finance's primary job, review expenditures, but more importantly, look at the revenue side and decide what your taxes are going to be for the next following year. It's also in charge of borrowing for town projects, so any school projects or road projects that need to be borrowed from. The Board of Finance organizes that and makes a decision on how that would be financed, whether it would be a 20-year financing or a 10-year, negotiates hopefully what interest rates are. We don't really get to negotiate that much, and monitors the financial health of the town. Its primary function, as I said, is not by line item. So that the Board of Selectmen makes a submission, the Board of Finance can ask questions. Some of you may have been at the day-long meeting that Julia and the Board of Finance hold, where each department comes and reviews their budget. Board of Finance members can ask questions. They have no right to question an individual item other than asking informational questions about it. The Board of Finance cannot dictate an individual item. The same thing with the Board of Ed, with the joint meetings that are held. The Board of Finance can and does set the overall. They can say, Julia, your budget, given town finances and what we expect revenues are going to be, and general economic conditions, need to be a little less, or a little bit more. I'm not sure the Board of Finance has ever said a little more. Like the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, the joke about the Federal Reserve Board is that his job is to take the punch bowl away just as the party is getting started. Well, the local Board of Finance performs exactly that same function. It's to maintain fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also give my thanks to you, Julia, and to the League of Women Voters and to the volunteers, and I appreciate this opportunity. So Mark, no, I got it, thank you. So Mark and I have a very different view of the Board of Finance. I believe the Board of Finance is one of the most important entities in ensuring the long-term prosperity of Reading. So, and that's one of the reasons I believe the Board of Finance needs to change away from this looking at an annual budget and annual numbers and either approving or disapproving based on random factors, and rather look at what is in the long-term interests of us and our most important assets, which for us happens to be our homes. What are the pillars of Reading that make this such a special place to live? And what are we going to do to preserve those pillars while at the same time protecting taxpayers and respecting others? I believe that we can preserve town services and keep taxes low. I've done it as a member of the Board of Ed, and I look forward to doing it as a member of the Board of Finance.
I will caution that in the course of responses, not to make attacks of any kind on opponents. I don't necessarily consider that an attack, but I just want you to answer affirmatively as to how you view and how you will approach and getting into how you perceive your opponent's positions, if that's all right. Okay. The second question. Please explain your views regarding investment in schools and property values to Mr. Miller.
So, like I said earlier, I think that that Reading is one of the most special places in the world to live. I've lived here since 2000. My two children only know Reading as a home. My son was born here. I hope to live here the rest of my life. I love this town. And I want to preserve it and make it a special place. And there are pillars of our community, including our senior tax credit and senior services, our open space, our community center, and our concerts on the green, and yes, our schools. These are the things that make Reading special. And if you look at our homepage, you'll see that we celebrate our schools. It's one of the things we highlight to visitors as something that's really special about Reading. We need to preserve the greatness of our schools. And I'm really concerned over the last couple of years that many in our town have ignored the fact that our school budgets have been reduced proportionally to match our declining enrollment. So that if you look at our school budgets, based on projections and inflation, our budgets are lower than we would have expected with declining enrollment. People are ignoring that fact and seeking random and arbitrary cuts that I'm afraid will reduce the quality of our schools, reduce the things that make Reading special, and at the end of the day, harm our long-term prosperity and our property values. So I really believe in investing in schools, and studies show that every dollar that we invest in school returns more in property values.
Just need more time? Shall I repeat the question?
No, I got it. Obviously, Reading is a great small town, and we all want it to remain that. Sometimes it even beats Easton for the title of the best small town in Connecticut. And the pillars of the community are indeed education, moderate taxes, open space, senior tax credit, all right, and our commitment to the values of Reading, all right, and to continue that. I think that there are a number of factors involved with property values and investments in schools. Property values are more than just schools. I moved here for the schools with my children as well. But the fact is that location counts. People come here for open space. People come here for commuting distance in some cases because we are historically somewhat less expensive than towns that are closer to New York City, and historically we've had more moderate taxes. And it's very important that we continue balancing that for all citizens, all right? And that means restricting expenditure growth and trying to gain more taxes primarily from Georgetown. And a couple things about growth in the budget. If you look at the CT Mirrors put out a lot of data on growth in town expenditures, and you can look at the State Department of Education's website regarding education spending. In the last 10 years, enrollment has declined by 30%, all right? Nearly 400 students now. It declined again this year more than was projected. All right, over that time, the budget has gone down on an inflation-adjusted value 8%. So 8% down, inflation adjusted for inflation, right? Enrollment down 30%. I feel that the Board of Finance's actions in recent years, and obviously particularly the one that I voted for this year, right, were perfectly appropriate and well-considered reductions. And I hope to continue that as a member of the Board of Finance.
The next question then to Mr. Lewis. What metrics would you use to assess the town's ability to fund a growing $50 million plus town budget?
As we know, or people who live in Reading know, that we have very little commercial tax base. So, meaning that us, the homeowners, pay the overwhelming majority of the town budget. So it's critical that taxpayers are not overtaxed, but we also need to try and make sure that we, as a member of the Board of Finance, we're responsible for doing this, raise an appropriate level of revenue. The critical area for increase in future tax revenues in Reading is Georgetown. All right, it's the only place in town where we can develop property. It's the only place that zoning has allowed for large-scale development. There are no watershed area property issues, and it's central to Route 7 and to many other parts of the town. The critical piece of that, as those of you who've been to Juliet's town halls know, is the legal situation and the ongoing foreclosure. Right? As a member of the Board of Finance, we evaluate possible settlements to that and make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, who are really negotiating this deal, and then eventually to you, the taxpayers, of how that property can be developed. Planning and zoning and conservation are the primary drivers of development in Reading. It is not a function of the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance job is to keep taxes as low as possible while still funding all the things that we all value. As an 11-year member of Region 9, which is a school board and a board of finance, I have the experience in dealing with increasing enrollment and declining enrollment and maintaining. Joe Barlow is an awesome high school in maintaining that. It's that experience and that detail, examination of financial detail, that makes me the most qualified candidate to face the Republicans in the fall. Thank you.
So the question was about what metrics we would use to maintain a growing $50 million budget. And here are the metrics that I would use. Again, I think it's imperative that for the first time, the Board of Finance develop a long-term plan that, again, identifies what are those things about Reading that we need to preserve and perhaps expand to make it the special place we are. What are the drivers that make this a special place to live so that people will want to live here and therefore will preserve our important assets, including our homes. Of course, we have to compare that. Another metric is our ability to pay, including the comparison tax bases of surrounding communities. Only by doing that long-term plan and identifying those metrics can we really develop a comprehensive approach to our budgeting that ensures Reading's long-term future. Now, Georgetown is in many ways a dream that has always been a little bit at reach. And as a result of that, and frankly, it doesn't look like those taxes are gonna arrive anytime soon. So we have to stop dreaming about getting tax revenues from Georgetown and start planning for our future. What happens if Georgetown doesn't come? What happens with the WCC plan if Georgetown doesn't come? We already owe $2 million to it. We're gonna owe a lot more pretty soon. What's the plan? What's the long-term future? We don't hear that from the Board of Finance, and it's time we did. And I think if we apply those metrics, we identify them, and then very importantly, we engage the community. One of the things I hope to change about the Board of Finance is we should embrace when people come to the meetings and offer their opinions, not discourage them or make sexist comments about them. And that's something I think we really need to change.
Okay, so this question to Mr. Miller. At what point should the senior tax benefit be revisited? Should it be needs-based in the future or just reduced in amount with qualifications remaining essentially the same?
So I really strongly support the senior tax credit, and for those of you who don't know, I'll give you my interpretation of it. The senior tax benefit enables seniors who've retired and perhaps been on fixed incomes to stay in our town, even though we are, for the most part, a higher tax-based town than our surrounding communities. The purpose of it, therefore, is to keep long-term residents in town. And so one change I would advocate making to the senior tax credit is that right now, the residency requirement for it is 3 years. And I think that's too short. If our goal is to keep residents here, then we should make a longer time for you to qualify for it. Now, with respect to other changes, I don't see right now a need to make those. I think, again, I'll come back to this. The town needs to develop a long-term plan. The long-term plan has to value those things that matter to us, like the senior tax credit, like our schools, like the other pillars of our community, and then match those against the metrics we used around what can we afford. And then we have to make some difficult choices. We can't wait for Georgetown. We have to start planning.
Repeat the question?
Yep, I got it. I also feel that the senior tax credit is, I don't believe there should be any changes in senior tax credit. The purpose of the senior tax credit is to make a diversity of ages in town, because it's been discussed and proven over and over again that the cost of educating children in an average home in Reading greatly exceeds the taxes that homeowner pays. We need people to stay here for their entire life, to come, have their children, be sort of revenue negative to the town at that point, but stay in their homes after their children have graduated and left and start reducing the level of expenditures that they cost the town and continue paying taxes into the town. And that's the purpose of the senior tax credit. Marianne Guitar highlighted this over and over again about the need to have a diversity of ages in the town. We need both children and seniors in order to maintain a financially stable town. And that's the reason why we have a senior tax credit, and that's why I think it's a fair benefit. we do have, and the senior tax credit is part of the town plan, right? Every year that town plan is revisited. All of the elements that we've been talking about here are reviewed by planning, zoning, and the Board of Finance has an input into it. And that kind of plan is reviewed every, I believe, 10 years, all right? And it's formed the basis of how we govern in town, how we purchase open space, and how we try and raise revenues for a town. Georgetown will happen, and it's a critical part. We all have to believe it will, and we all have to work to make sure it happens. As a member of the Board of Finance, I've been privileged to hear the briefings that Julia gave, which she's also given them later on to the full town, and I have every hope and confidence that the legal situation will resolve itself sometime in my lifetime. I actually live in Georgetown, so the real estate agent said, "Oh, you will have this across the street." Obviously hasn't quite happened, since 2002 when I committed to buy the house, but maybe someday.
To Mr. Lewis, what is your take on the lack of a state budget and how it is affecting and will affect Reading?
Well, those of you who follow Hartford know the governor is currently governing the state by executive order. As part of that executive order, he is implementing elements of the budget that he proposed originally. And that included eliminating roughly $180,000 in school aid to Reading and other 30-some-odd other richer towns in Connecticut. He also proposed burdening towns with the maintenance of the teachers' pension fund, which has been underfunded by multiple Democratic and Republican administrations for maybe 50 years. So I don't think, thank goodness our legislatures, I believe, will not burden us with that teachers' pension fund contributions. But I do think that Reading school aid, as it has been decreased over the last few years, will probably get reduced. What won't be touched, in my view, will be the special ed funding, which is critical. It's far bigger than the roughly $180,000 we get in education funds. So there are other elements that Julie has outlined at the last Board of Selectmen meeting regarding other aid that Reading gets. But the biggest hit we'll take, and the one that the Board of Finance talked about the most part during the budget system, was the possible loss of school aid. That's one of the reasons why the Board of Finance looked very closely at the school budget this year to try and find a way to offset possible loss in aid, which I think probably will happen. Now, somebody asked me the other day, when do I think the budget will be done? Since I'm running for a lowly office here in Reading, I am not a state legislature. I asked Adam Duncan the other day at the book fair, when did he think it would happen? And he was not able to predict it, nor any experts that I've seen in the press have been able to predict when we'll actually have a state budget. But I do think we will probably have a reduction in our education aid.
So the good news is last night at our Board of Ed meeting, we learned from our superintendent in conversations with the State Department of Education that it's likely that our cost sharing for special ed that Mark was referring to will be preserved. So I agree with Mark that will be preserved, and that's a really positive thing. I think that what will happen with our education sharing, and I agree with Mark, is that certainly that will be reduced. I do believe the pension issue, which is the really, really serious cut, will not happen for a host of reasons. I don't believe, I'm maybe hopeful here, but I don't believe the Assembly will follow through in that. I also think there are a number of legal questions involving whether that can actually happen or not, and what would happen to the funds that actually exist, et cetera, et cetera. I do think, though, it's a reminder that we need to be more fiscally prudent as we look at our budgets and bake in reserves where we need to, where we believe cuts like that will occur. This year, I disagreed vehemently with the Board of Finance, which cut $300,000 out of our health insurance reserve. And the Board of Ed appropriately, with fiscal prudence, restored $400,000 of that. Well, we learned last night at our Board of Ed meeting that if we had followed through with that Board of Finance plan, we would have run through the reserve early in the year this year. Now, that's highly fiscally irresponsible. It would violate our fiduciary duties. Thank goodness the board restored it, and now it looks like we'll be able to sustain that reserve through the end of the year. It's another example of where I think I would approach the budget with much more fiscal prudence and conservatism.
This is a bit of a follow up on an earlier question. And this one to Mr. Miller first. How do you feel about West Reading being developed further to generate commercial revenue?
So I live in West Reading. We feel in many ways sometimes like we're on the other side of town, literally on the other side of the railroad tracks. West Reading is, when we first bought our house, my brother and I were painting it, and we took a little car ride around, and we're the first customers at Lombardi's Pizza when it first opened back in 2000. I think it's a really special place. I remember taking my children to the restaurant that was there, whose name I'm now forgetting, the station house. Fantastic breakfasts. It's crying out for more development, and there's a lot of land there, especially next to the garden center there. I believe the town should do almost everything it can to try to encourage more development in that area. Now, unfortunately, in the past year or two, the zoning board actually rezoned part of that property back to a mixed-use residential, which would, of course, run counter to our goals of encouraging more commercial property base there. I think it's another example of the Board of Finance failing to plan for the future and using those plans to communicate to other boards what's important. It's one of the reasons why I'm really eager, as part of the planning, to identify those areas beyond Georgetown where we possibly can expand our commercial tax base. We are crying out for more diversity in our tax base, and I think West Reading really presents an excellent opportunity.
No. Well, I'm sorry to have to say, for those of you who live near West Reading, it is not a viable location for additional tax revenue or development in town. This was studied 20 years ago by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the problem is that the tremendous level of wetlands that are there restrict and prevent future development from happening. Now, the zoning of that individual property was requested, as I understand it, by the owner, but the fact is the land that is there simply cannot be developed. All right, it has nothing to do with the Board of Finance. That is not the job of the Board of Finance to try and find commercial development and encourage zoning to change its mind. Planning, zoning, and conservation are the land use boards in Reading, and they control the development in the town. All right? Board of Finance cannot go to them and say, change your mind. All right? It is not the job of the Board of Finance to try and develop land in Reading. That is the selectman as the chief marketing officer of the town, planning, zoning, and conservation. And West Reading is simply not a place that development can be done. There's a study that's 20 years old, and they looked it up. It hasn't changed. The wetlands haven't changed. It's the headwaters of the river. The chances of development there is pretty much zero.
Mr. Lewis, what will you do to promote trust between our elected boards?
Sure. Well, I think a couple things here. For many years, the Board of Ed, and we're going back 10 years or more, as the prospect of declining enrollment was predicted, in fact, what has had happened, the Board of Ed was promising the Board of Finance that it would provide reductions in expenditures in line with reduction in enrollment. And every year, Board of Finance would ask questions, be told, yes, we have a plan, we're in long-term planning. Some Board of Ed members encouraged planning, the Board of Ed never did that sort of planning and actually poo-pooed it. Said, oh, the enrollment is really not going to go down, it's just a projection, it won't happen. And over time, the trust broke down between the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed. Because the Board of Finance 4 years ago, I think perhaps belatedly and perhaps clumsily from the meetings I was at, and I was not on the board at that time, started to try and restrain in expenditures in the same way that I did as an 11-year member of the Barlow Board. All right, that created, and the superintendent at the time is often largely responsible for this because he chose a path of confrontation over this matter instead of a collegial discussion of how enrollment and expenditures need to move together. Not at the same rate. No one expects if enrollment's down by 30% that the budget goes down by 30%, but at least there should be an attention to financial detail, which Region 9, as a Board of Finance and a Board of Ed does. It's the combination of the Board of Finance and the Board of Education jointly, looking at these problems separately from their different perspective, the different hats, as Julia mentioned when she was chair of Region 9 constantly, that give that creative tension and result in something. To say that there's conflict or a lack of civility is often a code over saying the Board of Finance has just not agreed with the Board of Ed. And that's simply not a true respect. The Board of Finance has done a great job. Thank you.
So the question was about civility, and we heard about school.
What leads you to promote trust specifically? Trust.
So the question was about trust, and we heard about budget cuts, which is the problem. My opponent confuses civility with budget cuts to education. In his statement at Hello Reading, he conflated civility with being a rubber stamp. No, civility is not denigrating our superintendent of schools and advocating that he be fired. Civility is not being openly dismissive of students, of citizens when they come to express their views, or suggesting to one parent who asked about revenues that we can't have bake sales in
And I'm going
town.
to caution you, I would like you to answer this as to what you will do to promote trust.
And I didn't say that. I want to point out.
Not
So Julie,
as
I'm answering to that as best I can.
proactively for you,
With
how
the-
will you promote trust
Thank you.
instead of discussing your opinion as to your
I think I'm
opponent?
complying with the rules you provided us, so.
Reset the clock if you would for Mr. Miller.
Here's the history over the last 4 years. Over the last 4 years, we've cut more than 11 full-time teaching positions out of the schools, and an even greater number of specialists and paraprofessionals. We've had reductions in writing specialists, in enrichment and gifted and talented, in music, foreign language, support staff who maintain the buildings. And the cuts have reduced the budget more than $2 million below the inflationary estimates. And yet people have called those pinpricks and insignificant and minimal. So the way we create trust is we begin to treat each other as professionals. We accept people at meetings and listen to them. We don't dismiss them and ask them to be quiet because the time is running short. And we're all volunteers. We're all volunteers trying to help out. The Board of Ed is not out there with some personal mission to bankrupt the town. And I wish the Board of Finance would engage honestly and listen instead of dictating further and further cuts.
Maybe one more question, and then we'll take closing statements. Is that about right? This one to Mr. Miller first. What is your attendance record of your previous service?
First of all, I want to say that I have, until recently, was Senior Vice President at Alexion Pharmaceuticals. It was a global job that took me away far too often from this town, from my family, and indeed from the Board of Ed. And so I'm glad to say that I've left that position. I'm working as a consultant right now, semi-retired, and I have plenty of time to devote to the board. I also want to say that the criticism of this is in some ways a bit unfair, because what they're leaving out are the hours and hours and hours of service that I've devoted to the board outside of normal board meetings. And I'm happy to talk to you about some of that. So I led the Early Education Study Committee that resulted in changes to our kindergarten program, required countless hours of study, analysis, recommendations, input from parents, and then ultimately a solution that really enhanced our schools tremendously and has been widely accepted. I've twice served, and I'm serving it now, on the Collective Bargaining Committee, lending my skills as a lawyer with emphasis and skills in labor and employment law to help the town as it negotiates its contract. And as a matter of fact, I'll be at a meeting tonight on the negotiations. I've served on the Superintendent Search Committee. I've served on the PTA Liaison Committee. I've served on the Facilities Committee, the Long-Term Planning Committee. All of this, the hours of service, are things that those who have criticized me have not told you about, frankly. And what I will pledge to you today is that if you give me the faith of your service, I will be at every meeting that I can, health provided, and my attendance record will be as good as anyone else.
Well, I think that attendance at board meetings is a critical function and display of a candidate's board members' willingness to actually do the job. I think that that's a matter of commitment. You shouldn't take a job if you can't actually perform the job. Committee work, and I've served on many more committees than Mr. Miller, and actually over 11 years, I've gone to about 230 board meetings. All right, and I've missed over that time 6. So I'm very proud of my own record. I'm not commenting on anybody else's record. I'll let people in the press do that. Of my record of serving on committees and at the board and being an active member, my peers recognized me, electing me chair of the board, vice chair of the board, and treasurer of the board. And they didn't do that because I was the last man standing. They did that because they recognized the hard work that I put into it, all right, while working an equally difficult job, right, with business travel and raising children, dealing with family emergencies and fatal illnesses and sicknesses. I was there, and I will continue to be there, all right, for Reading schools, and for Reading taxpayers.
You started, thank you. All right, so we now have time for we vote to give a 2-minute closing statement. And since Mr. Lewis, you went first, Mr. Miller, if you'd like to make a 2-minute closing statement.
Thank you. So I started off by saying that I love Reading, and I really do love Reading. I'm volunteering to serve as a volunteer because I really want to preserve what is special about Reading. But I'm also a Democrat, and this is a Democratic primary. And I want to remind us that one of the platform positions of the Democratic Party is our unwavering commitment to public education as our #1 investment. And I believe I stand apart from the candidates in standing behind that commitment. My opponent was the only Democrat to support a Republican motion made by Ward Mizuko, and in fact he seconded the motion, that would have resulted in $400,000 of cuts from our schools. A cut that was too extreme for any of the other board members and failed. And I would say that the Republicans nominated my opponent to run as a Republican for this position at the Republican Town Caucus. I think that speaks volumes for people who are going to the Democratic primary to vote. I will stand and fight for democratic values. I will work hard to develop a long-term plan for the Board of Finance that preserves the pillars of our town, including open space, our senior tax credit and senior benefits, the schools, our Mark Twain Library, and the other important pillars of our town. And I will do it by maintaining the quality of services while keeping taxes low, which I've done as a member of the Board of Education. I'll remind the voters that we've had 4 years of negative tax increases at the Board of Ed. And I'll say it again, that if you look at our budget from 2010 to today, we've seen enrollment-driven cuts that exceed what you would have expected out of declining enrollment. That's an opportunity for fiscal stability, for fiscal responsibility, and for a plan to make and preserve our town and make it even better.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here.
Thank you all. Well,
Not that casual, I'm
No
sorry,
problem.
obviously.
Well, I think that I am the most qualified candidate by my experience serving on both the Board of Finance and the Board of Education. Remember that the tax reductions that have occurred are because of Board of Finance actions, distinctly not Board of Ed actions. I believe that my experience on Region 9 is relevant to Board of Finance because it shows you can have an outstanding school with responsible budgets. I'm committed to the Democratic Party, shown by my service as chair and longtime treasurer, all right, and my appearance every time we go to a Democratic function. Who's there? Who's setting it up? Who's picking the chairs up? I am. That's why I've been elected chair of the party. And my vision, all right, that responsible budgets are possible that maintain all the pillars of our community for all of our citizens. To maintain open space, the senior tax credit, education, and moderate taxes, to keep all of us on an upward trend in our real estate values. If I might just say something in brief response, there were 3 motions presented to the Board of Ed, at the Board of Finance, and I'm very proud, all right, that we operate in a bipartisan manner. Not only was Julia cross-endorsed, but so a number of other town officials, our tax collector, our town clerk, and our town treasurer were all jointly cross-endorsed, and I'm very proud, a bit ironic given that I'm accused of being too partisan Democrat, right, as chair, that the opposing party would consider me, all right? I don't really know why they put me up at that. I didn't think they were gonna have a candidate, and I was not aware they would do that. So that was a bit amusing that I lost that caucus by 4 votes and the Democratic caucus by 1. But I think my loyalty to the party is absolutely unchallenged over the year, and working on a bipartisan basis, the final motion that made an appropriate cut for $250,000, as was the $400,000 cut in my view, was a bipartisan basis. Joe Dolan voted for it, a Democrat. I voted a Democrat. Susan Clark, an independent, former Republican, voted for it, and Bill Alvarez, all right, a Republican, voted for it. Thank you sir, for your support on September 12th. I'm sure Bill and I'm sure Ed and I will all agree, say, please come out and vote next Tuesday.
Thank you both so much for being here.